Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of Courage Talks. Special guest today is Lathika Pai. She's got more than 3 decades of experience, both across large tech corporates and startups, worked across US, UK, and India. And the special part, of course, being those more than 2 decades in startup, which is almost like a lifetime for a lot of startup entrepreneurs. Welcome, Lathika.
Thank you, Ethel. Lovely to be here.
So it's great to have you on Courage Talks, and the background story of Courage Talks is my book Against All Odds, which is my father's biography, where I discovered a series of incidents which described his acts of courage in his daily life, and I took that as a mission to carry forward to discover courage in other people's life as well. So, what does courage mean to you?
See, depends, right? Courage, what I think as courage, some may look at it as foolishness. But to me, courage is very simple. I need to be able to sleep at night and to speak what is in my mind the truth and what I believe in, and always saying it the way it is. To do that, it takes a lot of courage for me and for anyone for that matter.
Any role model for courage? Anyone's names pops up when you think about courage?
I think of my father, my grandfather, whom I've heard a lot of great stories about, about my mother. So I think in the family itself, I've seen them speak up for what's right and maybe what's not really popular at times.
We know what you are today, and of course there's a lot to talk about. We're going to unwrap that, but we don't know about your childhood, your growing up days. So why don't you just take us down memory lane? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? A bit about childhood. Any nasty or any funny incidents which remain with you, or something which your parents always told you about?
Sure, sure. So, I've our families have been here in Bangalore. That's my husband and my families for almost 100 years. Grandparents were from the South Canara, Mangalore district. The lot of focus was on education. So my grandfather was the Minister for Law, Speaker of the Assembly in Karnataka. Husband's grandfather was Chief Justice of Karnataka, and my dad was the founder of the Electronic City. My mother, back in the day, has a master's in sociology from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. Played table tennis. So I come from a family which is very, very, I would say, talented. Have given a lot back to the community, and that's really been something that's ingrained in me from day one, which is giving back and making sure that what you do is for always for the greater good. In an era where I think boys were prized possessions, I am the much sought after girl child after two older brothers. In
Wow.
fact, my mother was in the 60s, really keen, saying that I want to have a girl, and my dad was a little concerned, saying how many children am I going to have, because my mother was very clear that she wanted a girl. So it was I would say it was a really wonderful childhood that I had, because I was treated very much on equal with my brothers, and in terms of what I was allowed to do. In fact, I think I got away with much more being the youngest and the brat in the family. But any opportunity that my brothers had was something that I also had. In fact, I still remember I learned to go and ride a bike on the sly. And my oldest brother, who's a doctor, was teaching my second brother. And finally, I got a bit frustrated and I said, "Here, let me show you how to ride a bike," right? Here's how the gears go, etc. So I wasn't stopped from doing anything. I think I was always told by my father that education is very important, being self reliant is very important. Best piece of advice he gave me was that, your brothers are great guys, but they're going to get married. You need to be able to be on your own two feet and be reliant on yourself, right? So that was something that was very, very clearly espoused from day one, in being financially independent and reliant. And I was very fortunate that I married someone who also came from a similar background. My mother-in-law was a gynecologist. My father-in-law was a cardiologist. So my mother-in-law understood what it took in terms of challenges of being a working mother, a professional mother. And so she helped helped during the time when my children were young to make sure that the children had a schedule. She went, she slowed down on her practice. So it really has been, I would say, my childhood was, I went to school here in Bangalore, Sophia High School, and I was head girl of my school, part of all the extracurricular activities that were there in school. So sport was equally important to me, sport, drama, music, as was academics. And then I did my engineering in Bangalore at BMS College of Engineering, then left for the US to join my husband to my engineering, master's in engineering at Rochester Institute of Technology.
So I have a out of whack question. Growing up amidst such a esteemed legacy, great education, and a lot of discipline, does that privileged brought up devoid you of chances of courage, or does it put an additional pressure for you to look for instances where you couldn't demonstrate your courage? Maybe becoming the head girl. Was it like a point to prove that no, look, I'm not just sitting on my laurels, but I'm actually earning them myself?
See, in the Bangalore we grew up, right? We went to a school where no one really knew who, the other people were, their backgrounds, etc. These were something that we didn't speak about. So you could be with a child from
You
a
didn't throw
lower
your
mid.
weight around.
Yes, you lower middle class background. My classmates were, one was S.M. Krishna's daughter, another was the BPL family, Anju Nambiar, Rajiv Chandrasekhar's wife. But none of it didn't really matter who came from which background. We were there in school to have all the friendly rivalry that school offered and all the fun that school offered. We went to a convent school, which was very, very strict. My friends tell me that they couldn't bear me when I was in school because of the fact that I was always goody two shoes, and then the minute I left the convent, I became one of them. So we have some great anecdotal stories that we keep sharing. We're still very close, as friends. We've known each other since we were 3 years old. Our children now go to school, have went to school together, and are very close. So I think the privilege is not something that hinders you. I think what the privilege does is actually allows you to understand how important it is to speak up, right? When you see there's something wrong, whether it is for yourself or if it is for someone else. And I think that is something that is very, very part of my DNA. So anytime I hear that there's something that's gone wrong and I see that the person doesn't have the courage, I have either spoken up for that person or, help that person speak up.
So speaking up is important, fighting for your rights is important, but not always you might get those chances. So early in your career, what was the defining moment where you felt that you have something, right? You have something of caliber. Any particular instance, any particular happening in your life early on which gave you that sense of confidence that okay, I'm here for the long run, right?
Yes, I went to the US to do my master's degree at Rochester. And while I was studying, there was a professor, his name was Rolando Gabaron, and Rolando worked at Nortel, Northern Telecom.
Yeah.
And so I requested him for a internship, and I did get two back-to-back internships, after which I was offered a full-time job.
Hmm.
And the company also agreed to pay for my master's degree. So I was working full-time,
Hmm.
studying full-time, and I did a paper on advanced intelligent networks. This is early in the 90s, right? About how important, AI was in the whole networking telecom space. And I sent it to IEEE on a whim to see if it would get published.
Yeah.
And yes, they accepted it and they invited me to speak at that event. So I was very excited that my paper had been accepted, and I went and, spoke to the director at Nortel. He His reaction was very interesting. He turned around and said, "Who are you? You've just come on board, and you can't be representing, Nortel at this very prestigious IEEE event in Arizona. And as the director of product, engineering, I will go and speak and represent the company."
Hmm.
So I looked at him immediately and I said, "No, this is my paper that I have written. I have been invited to go and speak at the event, and I am going to take this up with the higher ups." And, this is a time where I was the only female engineer in the group, very, very male dominated industry. And he was taken aback, an Indian girl, almost fresh off the boat, right? Saying that, "Hey, you don't get to go and speak at a conference representing me."
Yeah.
So it went all the way up to the vice president of Nortel at the time. He heard me out. A couple of people heard me out, and they came back and said, "Lathika, you will go and speak and you will represent us because this is your paper." So
Yeah.
I go to Phoenix, and this was a life changing moment for both my husband, Sid, and me, because there was someone who heard me speak. His name was Dr. Arvind Sathi, who was part of the Carnegie Group, which was an offshoot of the Carnegie Mellon University, who was actually way ahead of its time in terms of AI and adoption of AI in customer care and billing systems for the telecom world. So he, actually said, "Would you want to move to Denver?" And Denver was becoming the telecom hub of the country.
Hmm.
And so I said, "Yes, but my husband was at Xerox in corporate finance at the time. I said, we are a dual profession couple." So he said, "I'm looking for people in business development, and I'm looking, for people in engineering." So we
Wow.
both got an opportunity to go to Denver. He, gave us both a break. And I think that's when I always say that one moment of courage of
Mhm.
saying, you don't get to speak,
Yeah.
right? Get to represent the company for a paper that has been accepted that I have written.
Right.
I think that was a very, very big turning point for both my husband and me from our professional perspective.
Right. But after working for those big companies, then you decided to be on your own. How did that happen?
Interesting. I was part of the founding team of a very large startup called Rulera. And we had 300 million in funding back in the day. And it was to
That's like
create.
almost a couple of $1 billion, if not less.
Exactly, exactly. And what it was, Heathel, was cloud ahead of its time, right?
Mhm.
It was creating data centers in tier two cities, waiting for the internet boom that we were all expecting. Unfortunately, what happened was 300 million was spent in a year building out these data centers. 9/11 happened and the dot com crash happened,
Oh, okay.
right? And I was by that time so very clear that I wanted to be on my own. That's when I said no job really excited me enough. And so that's when I saw the opportunity. Offshoring, outsourcing hadn't yet really caught on in the US, right?
Yeah.
People would refer it. I'm talking about the Midwest. I was in Denver, Colorado. People would refer to Bangalore as Bangalore. They didn't even know, Bangalore well enough. And this was around the Y2K time too. So the opportunity my partner and I saw was that, hey, we know the CIOs who are making decisions in the Midwest area. We know India, we know Bangalore. So we went and partnered with Mindtree Consulting. That was when they were about 250 people. We had, Ashok, KK, Subroto, all of them, Jani, all of them who were there. We went and said, we want to partner with you. We will be a business development arm, and Mindtree would do the delivery for us, right? So we would subcontract the work to Mindtree, and it was a very, very fruitful relationship both for us and for Mindtree. We brought them large clients like Symantec and a bunch, Quest, US West, etc., to the table.
Hmm.
So that's when I got the bug of being on my own, if in the technology space.
Hmm. Interesting. So, coming up with an idea to start a technology firm based on your tech prowess is one thing, but running operations, finance, business, sales requires a different level of skill, right? So how did you address that? I mean, did it require a lot of courage, or was it that you had a great team, you had a good co-founder? What were the silver bullets that actually worked for you there?
See, I think being an entrepreneur, you learn all the important skills and also you make a lot of mistakes, right? So there's no question about doing things right. I think I was very fortunate to watch Mindtree, the team at Mindtree in action. Every one of those founders, 10 founders, were absolutely phenomenal. The way Ashok, and Johnny and Kiki were all together for many years. I worked very closely with them for 4 or 5 years. I learned a lot watching them and understanding, from them. My co-founder Prabir was, he was from IIT Kharagpur. He was the quintessential salesperson who never took no for an answer, right? So between the two of us, we would tag team, we would learn, and that's how we built the business up.
Scaling up to 600 and then selling the company off, how did that happen?
I think that was the time, we were one of the first few people who got venture funding. We did an acquisition of Talisma's tech support. So we got the venture funding. We took it to a particular level. What we realized is that we would need a lot more money to get from 600 to 6,000 to 60,000, right? You need that. That's when you start needed to have that 20 million, 50 million in terms of investments. We realized that that was going to be a stretch for us in getting that funding. So it seemed much smarter to give it to someone who was looking for a technical support arm and get them to acquire us and let them scale it.
And it was during this B2K that you actually transitioned yourself from US to India. How did that happen?
What happened was that we moved back to India because my husband said was a senior partner at KPMG, and
Okay.
he was in New York the day 9/11 happened. And my father-in-law called me from India and said, "Where's my son?" And I said, "He's in New York." I was in Denver, so he said, "Turn the TV on." I was getting my children who were 3 and 5 ready for school, for preschool. And I turned it on and I just hung up and I said, "Oh, no, don't worry. He's absolutely fine." I had no clue what Sid was. And then I called, I get him at his hotel and luckily he picks up the phone because all the phone lines were jammed. And when I told him what happened, he said, "Oh, shoot." And he hung up because his team at KPMG was supposed to be there at the Twin Towers. And so he wanted to make sure that his team was fine. I didn't hear from him for a very long time, but I knew he was safe. And after that, he was very clear that he wanted to come back to India. He wanted to be here, his children, our children, to grow up here in India and be with, his parents, my mother, etc. So that was when, we spoke and we saw that it made sense. My partner Prabir was in the US, I was in India. So it really worked well for us, to have me here in India managing the operations and Prabir being in the US.
Back in those days, of course, it was still quite a privilege to be in the US, right? Earning green bucks and having a different sense of life. I know early 2000 Bangalore was pretty nice place to be, but nothing compared to the US, right? So the lifestyle change, getting your kids to adjust. I know 3 and 5 is still early, but I'm sure you would have had certain level of adjustments to make for them as well. So how is it coming back to India?
I think for both of us, because we came back to Bangalore, right? My husband and I are both from Bangalore. Our families lived, a mile apart from each other. So coming back to Bangalore was very, very easy in terms of coming back from a social and professional perspective. I think, yes, definitely careers were on an accelerated path. My husband used to run IBM for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, then joined KPMG as a senior partner. But I think in hindsight, it was absolutely the right decision to make, even professionally, because this is when the IT boom started in India. Bangalore was the hub
Yeah.
of it all. We were actually few of the professionals who understood doing business in the US and in India. So we were one of the few who actually returned back. So it turned out to be pretty much the golden era for us. So we were fortunate. We were in the golden era of technology in the US, in the 90s. Philippines, came back into India, during, the time when everybody was looking for people. I would actually end up becoming an interpreter to many visiting CEOs, saying, okay, Lathika, can you help us here, right? Can you tell us what needs to be done? So,
Okay.
some of the people that, I helped log me in. So I had one of their investors call me and say, can you please talk to log me and the team there? They're looking to come to India. And I would have conversations. And I always said it the way it was, right? I would tell them, no, this is not the right time for you to come in. And here's the reason why. And come back to me when you hit these numbers in terms of the number of people using your technology. And then they would come back and, say, hey, you're right. We're now back. So there was a lot of the ability for us to understand what and when was the right time to help support people who were looking at India as a opportunity either to sell their product or to come in and set up offshoring units.
So there was a phase of your career right after B2K from roughly about 2006 to about 2018 before you joined Microsoft. What was going on? What were your core objectives? I know I've spoken to 100 entrepreneurs. Maybe 99 of them say that they would never go back to a large corporate, right? And
Mhm.
obviously the reasons are well known, right? But how did you address your career at that stage? What was going on in your mind? Take us back in terms. Were you looking at a product? Were you looking at services? Were you dabbling between the two, or you were just being more flexible in terms of open to various opportunities that came your way?
So after B2K, I realized that I wanted to give back. And yeah, because every time we were hiring to get to 600 people, I must have interviewed at least 6,000 people, right? If not many more. So for every 100, the numbers that you could actually hire were three, four, they would show up and then they would leave. So I really felt that we keep talking about India's demographic dividend, but the reality is that they are educated but unemployable. So I got into skilling. I actually got to see India. I got to see, I went the whole value proposition that was made because I used to be the chairman of NASCOM for South India for the BPO side, and the value prop was we everyone who met, we would only talk about talent and the challenge of keeping talent, and we were all going to the same stomping grounds. So I went back to them and said, what if we kind of create the finishing school concept of helping these kids who've got an education, training them before they came on board, going to tier 2 tier 3 colleges in a tier 1 city and tier 1 college in a tier 2 tier 3 city, right? So went and got a conglomerate of BPOs, whether it was Accenture, the Infosys BPO, Goldman Sachs BPO, etc., JP Morgan, saying let's give you a pool. We'll have job fairs, and we'll make sure that if they get an offer from two places, they have to take one, so that they are not precluding someone else getting a job, right? So we did that, and it was really, really rewarding, right? You had kids who were the first generation educated from a sweeper's child to a butcher's child who said, hey, we've got a job now at Infosys today. And that was life changing for those families in terms of working. And that opportunity worked really well. I think we worked with the Tibetans. We got a request from the Prime Minister's Office of Tibet, saying that we have a lot of youth who need help in getting into mainstream jobs in India. So we went to 8 to 10 of, I think I went to every one of the Tibetan rehabilitation centers and met with youth, trained them. We worked with the Indian Army because with the director of the resettlement, where veterans who had taken a bullet for us in Kargil or any on the borders, they would get their pensions, go back to their villages, build a house, get a sister daughter married, and then they were broke, and the only jobs they got was as security guards. So we trained them and got them jobs in, in the logistics side, into manufacturing, etc. So super super rewarding. Like, I've been to the nooks and crannies of India,
Yeah.
been to at least about 50 cantonments to understand what it is to work with the different parts of India. Very very rewarding. But I think one lesson we learned is, either you do good or you make money. You can't make money doing good, right? That's something that we learned easily, right? So that was when I said, okay, this is great, and let me figure out how. And like I mentioned earlier, Hital, I had a lot of people from the US who would say, we really need somebody to come in and help us navigate India. These were typically startups which were in the $50 million, 50 to $100 million in business. They wanted somebody to really open up, do Asia market entry for them.
Hmm.
And the role was not large enough for me to be their MD full time. So I
Yeah.
was like a fractional MD, for them, in terms of opening the doors, doing the small BOT operations. So I would come in, set up shop for them, hire their sales team, hire if they wanted outsourcing to happen, hire the teams, give it, and then kind of give it back to them. So transfer the ownership to them. So that was a lot of fun. So I was using all the skills that I learned at B2K in terms of how to run operations, how to hire, how to retain, what are the challenges, finding the best legal help and support, accounting support, and navigating India both professionally and culturally. So
Hmm.
so that was something that I did.
Right.
So and about the time in 2015-16, I started a platform for women entrepreneurs called SonderConnect.
Hmm.
I realized I would go to many sessions and be on panels and talk about what women entrepreneurs didn't have, shake my head vigorously in terms of what was not then, what could be done, and leave. That's when I realized that we needed to start something where we could actually help women entrepreneurs. That was the birth of SonderConnect. So, I did it with three absolutely amazing leaders in their own rights. So Vaishali Kasturi, who was the president of AWS for a little while, and then now is general manager at Microsoft. Anju Shenoy was at the head of HR for Dell, Genpact, Sequoia, and Sejal Gulati, who came in as the president of Times Analytics. So I called them, before I finished a sentence saying, ladies, I need your help. We need to start this platform. That's how they all said yes. And SonderConnect was born. And, that's when we started, and, working and helping and going deep in giving them the support that they required. I think most entrepreneurs, feel that funding is the most important, I would say, event in their entrepreneurial journey. But truly, it is the peer group that they need, the networking they need, the mentoring and access to the right people is what is also equally important. And that's what SonderConnect did. And so I was very happy doing all of this when I was approached by Microsoft and to come in as their MD for startups. And my first reaction was, not me. I don't think I'll ever go back into the corporate world. Here are a few resumes that you should consider. And one person was pretty insistent, saying that, why don't you come in and do what you're doing for women entrepreneurs, for all entrepreneurs? So I said, okay, let me give it a shot. I didn't have a resume. I needed help preparing a resume. And there was a lot of, I think people were smirking, how long is she going to last? Because my reputation preceded me of just saying it the way it is, right? And how long I would survive in the corporate world saying it the way it is. But
Yeah.
I was very, very fortunate that my hiring manager, Annie Parker, who was the global managing director for startups at Microsoft. She came from a startup background herself and had been, told that she needed to, hire people who were entrepreneurs, who were founders, who knew the ecosystem in. And so while I was speaking to her, she was very, very clear, saying that, listen, I want you to come on board. Tell me what it'll take to bring you on board. You're absolutely the person I'm looking for the region. And I said, as long as you can help me tackle the internal corporate challenges, I will do whatever it takes in
Hmm.
building up the ecosystem. For me, Hital, what was very important is to say that I can help any entrepreneur right, especially in their early stage. Give them the access, give them the access to technology, access to mentors, access to investors, access to market, right? And the Microsoft for Startups platform was a phenomenal platform to do that.
Hmm. Very interesting. And Microsoft, while they obviously hired you in India, but they onboarded this program, Highway to 100 Unicorns, where you were covering 16 countries, right? So, were you ready for such kind of a hectic global travel as well?
So Highway actually started. Come back to Highway. I think the attraction of the role really was that it was a for the MD for Middle East North Africa, right, which included all the emerging markets,
Hmm.
and this was pre-pandemic 2018, and it was absolutely phenomenal because I got to meet startup ecosystems from Lebanon to Egypt to Morocco, Pakistan, Bahrain, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, everywhere. I was in 2018 and 19. I visited all of these countries meeting entrepreneurs, both technology entrepreneurs, and everywhere I made sure I met women entrepreneurs too. What was fascinating is, and I also met the government officials and who were trying to replicate what India had done and was doing for the startup ecosystem. And
Hmm.
what was fascinating was that they were not interested in terms of what was going on in Silicon Valley or in China or in Israel. They wanted to understand how the Indian startup ecosystem had taken off. What were some of the things they did right? What were some of the things that could be avoided? And so I absolutely loved the role because I was also helping in terms of giving them ideas into which they were putting into their policies right at the time in terms of helping startups and meeting with the right people. So it was a role that I signed up for. It was a role that I thoroughly enjoyed. And then, when I came back to India, what was happening at the time was that there were all the state governments were investing in their startup cells. So there were a lot of requests coming in to say, can you come in and meet our entrepreneurs? In 2018-19, there was the unicorn list that came out. And if you looked at that list in 2018, April of 2019, actually, they
Hmm.
said we'll get to 100 unicorns by 2025. But on that list, all the unicorns, every single one of them were either from Bangalore, Delhi, and maybe a couple from Mumbai, Pune, etc.
Hmm.
None were there from the tier two cities, right?
Right. Yeah.
Where the startup ecosystem. So that was when I said, okay, why don't we actually start working with them now? Right, and in 6 7 years we will have unicorns coming in from these cities. So that's the reason the highway to 100 unicorns.
Okay.
That was the way we looked at it, which was
Yeah.
go to tier two cities, give them the exposure that they were looking for. Why did founders move from, say, Jaipur to Bangalore, or from Cochin to Bangalore? The reason was all the VCs were in Bangalore, which they found very important.
Yeah.
The startup networking of peers was in Bangalore or in Delhi for the most part. And that's when they felt that they were being left behind in terms of being in their hometowns, right? So it was something that the state governments were saying, hey, we want you all to stay here, versus the founders saying, no, we need to go where the action is, right? So the
Yeah.
same exodus, you have to be in the valley for it to be successful, until you started seeing, Austin becoming another city in the US that had startups. You saw Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Denver, Boulder, Colorado, etc. So that
Hmm.
was the idea between the highway to 100 unicorns. Very, very successful program, because what we did was went and met with the startup cells in each one of the states, spoke to the principal secretary of IT. It was a very simple, I would say, program which said, we will come in, evaluate your startups, pick 10 of the most promising startups. They would be part of the EmergeX program. We will do a 1 day event where we will bring in experts from Bangalore and Delhi and Mumbai, etc., whether they're product marketing, product design, technical architects from Microsoft, to talk about cloud, what it is to adopt cloud. AI was at its early stages, and what, go to market. How do you stay in India? Do you go to the US? Access to investors, years, right? So it was a fantastic value proposition that this each every state, I didn't get a no from any state, right? So it was simple. It was they would hold the event, which is a 1 day startup event, where they would invite a couple of hundred startup founders to it. We would bring in all the experts in and have the event. Then we would pick 10 of their top emerging startups, bring them together. So this was pre-pandemic. We started in Ahmedabad, then went to Jaipur, went to Cochin, went to Pune, went to Hyderabad, Goa, and that's when the pandemic struck, and we had to kind of shut the in-person events, right?
Hmm.
But when we look at it, 5 years later, I have several founders who ping me and say that, thank you for being there and supporting us, because we stayed back in our states. We got the access that we wanted and that we needed. And, I think thanks to the pandemic, in some ways, they couldn't move, and they created jobs and their teams in the
In their
states that
respective
they lived
states.
in. That's right.
So I think it's a great point to ask me. You were obviously enjoying yourself as an entrepreneur. Microsoft gave you a chance to relive or continue your entrepreneurial journey while helping other entrepreneurs. So between SonderConnect and Microsoft, when you interacted with so many entrepreneurs, any stories that remain with you of any entrepreneur about their courage, about something which they were doing very different, something which they were doing which required a lot of effort, which required a lot of thinking, and the stories that remain with you, if you could cite some examples.
Wow. Yes, I've met some fascinating founders across the region, right? One was in Jordan, two Iraqi brothers who were operating from a shed and then had moved to Jordan from Iraq. Had seen the gaming industry, right? Was all the games were international, catered to a non Arabic world. So they created games that were very relevant to the Arabic world, met with them, and it was fascinating how they grew that business and then sold it, to an American buyer for tens of millions of dollars. So, they saw the opportunity and they came in there. The other was, when I was in Islamabad, and I had someone come in, meet me. He had driven 4.5 hours from Peshawar, and he told me I said, "What made you start your startup?" It was the Dunzo of Peshawar, right? It was taking packages from one place to the other, and he said, at the time we had the Taliban, and we needed to get packages from one place to the other, and we needed to map it out. And the help he needed really was that they were actually creating the mapping to make sure that there were no landmines along the way of their drivers going from place A to place B, and they needed the technology support, and they needed the credits that Microsoft was giving to all startups and to build out their technology platform. Again, we were in touch, and it was great to see how 6 years later the business is still thriving. They've taken it from one city to the other. I met a bunch of female founders. They had started a startup called Sehat Kahani, and Sehat Kahani was basically, at that time, what they said were a lot of the young girls in Pakistan became doctors, but after they got married, they didn't, it was not easy for them to practice. And both the girls were doctors, and they wanted to make sure that they brought these doctors back into the fold, give them an opportunity to do, teleconsulting and provide the services. Today, Syed Khani has grown, tremendously. They have brought in over 10,000 doctors back into the fold onto their platform in terms of providing the consulting services. So, it takes a lot of courage to be in these countries in terms of not having access to funding, access to technology, and being able to help them, giving them, the platform to be even to showcase them at various Microsoft events is something that I really enjoy doing. Went and met folks in Egypt who were creating some really really interesting technology for the local markets.
Hmm. Very interesting, and very good examples across Iraq, Pakistan, India, Egypt. The other aspect, which of course, it's difficult to leave out the topic of women on empowerment when you're talking to a woman leader. How much of your own examples or experiences were instrumental in empowering some of the women entrepreneurs? Were there any personal examples that you had to take? Were there any specific instances where a woman entrepreneur was always in the verge of giving up, and then you kind of pulled her back? Any such instances that remain with you from your experience?
Absolutely. I don't do very well when there's a gun to my head, right? So, I mean,
Can
it's
someone dare
something.
to do that?
Oh, plenty, plenty,
The
plenty,
Naughty
right?
guy was the last one, I believe.
No, 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 no. I've had some across the way, right? And there was a situation in one of the startups where we had a co-founder come in who had not kept up to his commitments, and then we were sitting at a negotiating table, lawyers, nobody else wanted to speak, so I was sent to speak. And this person basically threatened me and said, this is the amount we need, this is what we have, what you need to give us. And the lawyer started yelling at me. I looked at my watch and I told the gentleman, I said, I'm counting to 30. If this gentleman, if your lawyer here doesn't stop, right, and you and I don't have a conversation, here are the emails that will go out where you did not live up to your commitments, right? Okay. I said we've been very patient. We've been very, very accommodating in terms of what has been happening. But this is not the right thing for our investors. This is the not right thing for the team. And we understand what you're going on. So you need to work with us here, right? We need to be fair. We want to be fair to you. You need to be fair to us. And he was shocked, right? Because literally, and when it was 29 seconds, he told, I got up to go, right? And that's where he said, no, no,
I was
no,
going to ask
please.
what count it stopped.
Yeah, yeah. Literally, it was. I think he didn't quite understand for a minute what I was saying until I pushed my chair back and saying, this negotiation is over, and I'm going, and this is what's happening. And he knew that I was not crying wolf. That's when he requested his lawyer, who literally was mid sentence when the shouting was happening, and he said, okay, let's talk. And we talked, and he said, I really like you. I said, I really like you too, but this has to be something that's important here. So yes, I've been called all kinds of names. I've been told, I've been bullied, I've been threatened, etc. But every time, hand on heart, I can say that I've always stood up for what I believe is right, and it's worked well for me. Most importantly, it's about being able to sleep at night, knowing that you've spoken up. As far as women founders, there have been a lot of instances. For example, I had a woman found, through SonderConnect, whose company got acquired, and the acquiring company treated them really badly. Right? Suddenly decided, saying that, hey, we have a contract which is at will. We don't need you anymore. So whatever vesting that is going to be there, doesn't work, and didn't stick to the commitments that were being made. And I think this is a challenge in our country, right? The employment laws do not favor private sector employees, especially in the tech sector. Neither are we a part of the government, the PSUs, nor are we a part of the labor laws that can be implemented.
Yeah.
So she came back to me, and I said, okay, here's plan A and here's plan A plus, which is plan A is, here is a lawyer that you can speak to, have the lawyer draft out a letter. And plan A plus is, I know the investors and I will be very happy to give them a call, right? The good news is plan A worked and they were given a fair exit. Both agreed what had been agreed to must be seen through. So I think the good news is that turned out to be very, very, a great turning point for this female founder. Then I, helped her find a home as a co-founder in another startup, and she's doing extremely well, right? So that was one area. They've been founders who've come to me on a personal personal side to say, this is what's going on in our personal lives. What can we do, and how can we help, and to help them navigate what's going on, giving them the courage in terms of speaking up. So there are multiple areas that I have been able to help guide them. I had, when I was at Microsoft, a set of founders, right? 8 of them who came to me, and they could not see eye to eye. I said, okay, we're sitting here in this room, until all of y'all are on the same page. You're embarking on a very important journey right now, which is bringing in external investors. And if y'all can't see eye to eye, I think there's going to be a challenge, right? And I told them, I said, I'm not saying it because I did it right. I'm saying it because I've made the mistakes. So I'm very honest about the mistakes I've made. I've seen every part of the entrepreneurial journey, right? I've seen my startup scale. I've seen my startups crash, burn. I've had co-founders who have gone rogue on me, and dealing with it. So that experience in terms of sharing it, I think becomes very valuable for a founder, because I think founders are always defensive, right? We have to be defensive about why we are doing what we're doing. Why are we not in a job? Why are we taking the decisions that we etc. You don't have the experience to say and do so. So I think that's something that I have been absolutely candid with in terms of sharing with the other founders to help them in their entrepreneurial journey.
Very interesting. And of course, you're very much in the hotbed of tech ecosystem, and sometimes technology exceeds beyond your, I mean, goes beyond your control, right? I mean, talk about AI as a great example, right? I mean, you can recollect any specific instances where technology has been a game changer for any of the startups that you worked, where it was something which required additional push, and you came in and as a mentor, as a support, worked out. Any particular example that comes to your mind?
Physics Wala is a very interesting one. About 2 years ago, the account executive came to me and said, "Can we get an introduction to Physics Wala?" It turned out the CTO and I were on the same panel at Tech Sparks. And then we started the conversation. And today, if you look at the scale and speed with which Physics Wala has accelerated, the founder got to meet Satya when he was here in India, right? It was because of the adoption of technology
Okay.
that in education, that really, and when I say technology, AI specifically, in terms of helping them scale at the level they wanted to scale.
Yeah.
Another was a large e-commerce player whose name, I know they would not want me to mention the name. They came in, and this is again, I would say 18 months to 2 years, actually 2 years ago, when we just started getting access to GPUs. We were looking at a training of the models, etc., to provide customer service, and they were doing the chat customer service. Turned out that they said, okay, we'll start with a 20-80, 80% being having physical humans, responding to the chats, 20% being done by the chatbot, right? In 3 weeks, they did flip where 80% of the chats were being done by the chatbot and 20%. And what was more interesting was that the customer sat score was much higher when it was done through a chatbot than the person, right? So the adoption of AI gave them huge productivity gains. At that time, AI GPUs were expensive, and even though it was expensive, they came back to me and spoke to me, and they said, "Oh, but it's very expensive." Now, having run a technical support call center, I know what the costs are. I understand the loaded costs. You don't only look at the salary of a person; you have to look at the infrastructure where these people are housed, the telecom costs involved, etc. And I said, "Okay, here's the deal. This is what your cost per minute is. And here's what it costs you per minute doing it with our leveraging AI." And it was almost 25% of the cost. So for a minute, they looked at me and said, "Okay, did somebody in finance speak to you? Like, who's the traitor in here?" So I said, "No, there's no one here. These are back of the envelope numbers that I know it works." But that was the cost saving back 2 years ago. Today, GPU access is much easier, cheaper. There's lots more out there. So AI definitely is something that is being adopted, should be adopted to give give you the productivity gains. I think in India, because I would say talent is not as expensive for the young talent that you have here vis-a-vis talent in the US, right? A US engineer is going to cost you 120,000, 100 to $120,000 a year. Here you're talking about a fraction of that's coming in. So adding people on your team lands up becoming much easier, and you say, okay, let me add 5 engineers. Now in the US, even when I worked there and was part of product companies, they had a thumb rule which was for every $1 million you had one person, right? That was the loaded cost for them in terms of saying, okay, for us to be profitable, that's what. So if it was a 50-member team, you were looking at revenues between 30 to $50 million. Whereas here in India, it was all about saying, okay, I have a team of 500 people. The numbers made a difference, right, in terms
Right.
of what needed to get done. So I
Yeah.
think that's where you're going to start seeing, changes to say, how is AI coming, increasing productivity, increasing customer satisfaction, the way you're served is going to be the big game changer.
The other element which comes up invariably in discussion in the startup ecosystem is ethics, right? Being from the same city where we have Byju's, what's been your experience as far as ethics and integrity in the startup world in India is concerned? Do you think there are genuinely really good startups which are not getting as much limelight, and it's only the bad ones which are getting over publicity, which is causing a bad name for the whole industry?
Wow, that's a loaded question. But again, I'll be as
Diplomatic.
courageous in terms of no, I won't be diplomatic. I don't not think I understand diplomacy, unfortunately, right? The reality is that I think people on the board, right, and typically they are the investors, have to take a very strong role on how they are looking at their startups and the books that are being managed by startups,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I think it's extremely important to make sure that there are no shortcuts being taken. Looking at how whether the book, it's not rocket science to know suddenly, Ethel, that if you're at $1 million, your startup now comes back and says, "Oh, going to get to $30 million in revenue in 1 year." It's not possible, right? So everybody is drinking the Kool-Aid together. It's not just the founder. Everyone saying, "Oh wow, my startup is now valued at from 30 million to $300 million, etc."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there is a lot that needs to be done by everybody in the ecosystem. Founders themselves need to realize that it's okay to be honest. It's okay to project. We all have to be optimistic. I'm not saying, don't project, but go from 1 to 3 to 5. You go from 1 to 30 million, that's not possible,
Yeah.
right? Investors should be realistic. So the good news is I've met a lot. I know everyone in a lot of people in the investor ecosystem, and I think everybody is taking a step backwards to understand and appreciate that the founders also need to be advised, to be cautioned in terms of what numbers they're coming up with, agree to what the founders are saying, hear them out, insist on bookkeeping, insist on making sure, it's not shades of gray with which that they're working with. It's black and white, and they're getting, of course, there are a lot of areas where if they get good advice from a really good, tax accountant or from a legal perspective, that you don't have to be in those areas of gray. Then you can't look the other way and say, "Oh, we didn't know what was happening," right? You can't say that. You have to take the responsibility of saying that, we should have paid more attention to something, right?
Right.
So I think with some of this unraveling that is happening. I mean, in the US you had Theranos in the US that unraveled, correct? So we work that unraveled. So it's not that it doesn't happen all over the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's unfair to say that only the bad startups are getting publicity. I think it's a good thing that people are hearing about it, because it's resulting in more of both the founders and investors being cognizant and taking the relevant steps necessary to kind of make sure that these mistakes don't happen, right? Knowingly or unknowingly. So I don't say that people are doing this on purpose. I think it's more being cavalier and not necessarily paying attention to it, saying chalta hai, hum dekhenge kind of situation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's true. Coming back closer home, your father founded Electronic City, and I have strong memories for it because that's where my first job was in Wipro. What was one legacy or one learning or one instance of your father that remains with you, or which you might have talked about?
Oh, several. I think I do remember going to the Electronic City when I was a kid. I was bribed with ice cream because, we had to go from the center of Bangalore all the way to almost Hosur. It was a long drive in an ambassador car, which probably didn't have AC at the time. We're talking about the 70s.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at acres and acres of land with boulders all over it. And that was something that struck me when I went back in the 90s, right? So my father passed away in 1988. Then I left for the US. Then went back in the 90s. I was absolutely, gobsmacked to see how the electronic city had kind of flourished and had become the vision that my father had, which was the Silicon Valley of India. And, I'm very thrilled to say that the Electronic City Association has now decided to put a nice bronze statue of my father as the
Wow.
founder of Electronic City. He called it Key to Electronics, Kionics. It was his vision to help, thousands of entrepreneurs. And I've had several entrepreneurs who've come back and said, when Mr. Baliga was there, here's how he helped us. One very, very interesting anecdote about my father that struck me was the day my father died. And, post the funeral, a gentleman came to see my mother and us, and he got us pictures of an orphanage that was built, right? And he had put a placard in my father's name. So we said, what was the story? So he said, I was a contractor and I was trying to build something, get a very large project. And I went with a suitcase filled with money to your father. And when I was leaving, I left the suitcase behind. And my father saw the suitcase and said, Mr. So and so, you've left a school suitcase behind. And he said, No, no, sir, this is for you. So I said, What is it? And he said, Oh, no, something small. My father figured out what it was. Then he looked at him in the eye and said, Mr. So and so, thank you very much. I have everything that I need. My family has everything that we need. And clearly, you don't need this, right? He said, Yes, I don't need it. So he says, I want you to use this money to build out an orphanage. There is one which is looking for help and support. Please use the funds for that, right? Now, this gentleman took my father's words seriously, went and built that orphanage. We had no clue about it until my father died and he
Oh
showed us the
man.
picture,
Oh man.
right?
Yeah.
So the fact that we come from where ethics, integrity, honesty is something which is very, very important to us. Whether it was my father, my grandfather who was speaker of the assembly, my husband's father who was chief justice, my husband, we all come in to say that integrity, ethics, honesty is the most important part of what makes us be who we are today.
And we normally say that our parents' legacy can be reflected in our children. Anything you'd like to comment about your kids?
My children, it's interesting. My daughter has just started. She also wants to give back to society. She did a master's in the UK and came back. They were born in the US. They have an opportunity to live and work in the US and the UK. But she has joined Teach for India. She is now teaching at a government aided school. I'm very impressed. When I see her going to school, she comes back with some great stories about the children in that school. And she was very clear. She said that if I am teaching and I want to work with children, I want to do it in India. I want to do it for our children, right, first, and give back. So I think some of that giving back has,
Yeah.
she's seen my in-laws be doctors and and give back. My son is the quintessential startup entrepreneur, and for him, he says, I want to be able to create jobs, livelihoods for people. So I think some of that is rubbed off for sure on our children. They will create their own paths. They will create memories that are relevant to themselves, to society. I think looking at their grandparents, great grandparents, and the legacy, which has always been, how can you improve and do something that will change other people's lives, is something which is very important. Today, now that I tell people now that I'm unemployed, the focus really is to see how I can build the SonderConnect platform. To date, we've helped 200 plus founders, 165 startups raise over $100 million. Revenues that they've generated is probably 100 million plus. More importantly, almost 75% of them are still in business. So, how do we take this from where we are to 1,000 women founders over the next 5 years? Even at $1 million average revenue, it's $1 billion plus platform that we've created, right? In terms of really moving the needle and helping these women founders. So, to me, that's exciting in terms of what I see for the next 5, 10 years, really doing what I'm most passionate about, which is helping women founders. And also, I love music. I make sure that I provide a platform for artists to perform in my home, get discovered, and then they get promoted. So we're bringing in, we're launching the Sonder Collective, which is going to be a mix of artists, performing artists, all women, designers, both in fashion and home products, founders in AI, technology, all together on one platform, and giving them that access to be recognized and to get the mentoring that they want.
Glad that you're allowing the cultural growth as well to happen along with the technology growth and the entrepreneurial growth as well. Any world leader or any leader that you look up at, business leader as well, right? Anyone who inspires you or inspired you in the past, and someone whose legacy you have kind of carried on, someone who's more like a childhood hero, or maybe, I don't know.
I'll go back to my dad in terms of what he's done. But I think I must, go back to the entire team at Mindtree.
Yeah.
I think Ashok, Jani, KK, Subroto, they're absolutely phenomenal leaders, right? They even today, there's so much warmth with which they meet everyone, not just me. I've also had chances to get to know Nandan, very well. It's just absolutely amazing how grounded, how relevant they are to the ecosystem, but at the same time, have kept their balance in terms of who they are and what they bring to the table. So I've been fortunate to meet a lot of them. I've been fortunate to meet a lot of phenomenal women leaders from India and the US. Vaishali Kasturi, I have a great anecdote. Vaishali is not only a phenomenal lead tech leader, with I gave her a call. I'm supposed to know her really well, and I said, "V, I'm looking to understand who is the top marathon runner, female marathon runner in India." She said, "You're talking to her," and I didn't hear her. And I said, "No, what's her name?" She says, "LP, that's me. I have run every marathon in the world,"
Wow.
right? So again, someone who's grounded, who's someone who's real, who's someone who leads with passion, integrity, and is someone that I really, really look up to. Sandy Carter, who's in the US, she was the one. Literally, I had a 60-second conversation with her. She was the general manager for cloud at IBM, and in 2015, I met her and I told her, actually early 2016, I met her and said, I want to start SonderConnect. And before I finished my sentence, she said, I will give you all the support that you need. And 10 years later, she continues to be a part of the support that we need. Annie Parker, I mentioned, again, a leader who led with a heart, who led with the passion in terms of really being out there to help. So I've been very, very fortunate that I've had bosses and mentors who've been fantastic. Sangeeta Bavi, who was my last boss at Microsoft, right? To see how her journey has been in terms of starting, partnering with her in terms of creating the startup pod, to becoming, to leading all all of the startups activity at Microsoft, right? Building a hundreds of $1 million business for Microsoft, and watching her journey has been phenomenal. So I've been very, very lucky in terms of being able to work with all ages, right?
Yeah.
To me, I find the millennials phenomenal in terms of their ideas and what they come up with and how they execute it, and really being there to help them as a sounding board. So truly it is. I remember speaking to Adit Pashisa of Zepto,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This was 2.5, 3 years ago. And I was so impressed with the amount of homework he had done. We were, they were on a compete cloud, I think AWS or Google at the time, and we were trying to bring Azure to them. And he had done his homework. He had spoken to other unicorn founders and the pros and cons of Azure are. So I was really impressed with the due diligence in with which he had come for the meeting and had, the questions that he had. So I think that's been fascinating for me in terms of saying leaders, young leaders, right, who are leading the way to veterans that I mentioned. So to me, I look up to all of each and every one of them from whom I've learned what leadership is all about.
Phenomenal list, and I'm definitely going to be researching more about them for my next episode as well. But one name which I was waiting to hear, it didn't come up. I don't know if anyone has told you, but you remind me of the Murtis, right? You got the boldness and the charm of Sudha with the entrepreneurial zeal and ethical integrity of Narayan.
Wow, that's a lot, right? But I can promise you, I'm not as simple as Sudha is.
I just picked two elements of Sudha, right? No, the boldness
No,
with which you went to your boss at Nautil, right,
yeah,
is nothing different from what Sudha did at Tata, right? And
yeah,
requested for the ladies' toilet to be established at Telco and all, right? So, no, I saw a certain bit of, and you started by talking about the South Karnataka synergy as well, and that name
that's
remained
right.
with me as well. Any particular book or books that impressed you during your journey? Anything which remains with you?
I love the book Ichigo Ichi, right? Which says, living in the moment. If there's something that I do really, really well, I live in the
Yeah.
moment. For me, every moment is important. It's relevant, whether it is the trials or the tribulations and the jubilations that follow. I truly live in the moment. I think that's one of the reasons why people ask me, how I deal with stress. I said, I always look at the fact that it is what it is. I look at life with a lot of gratitude. I always look at cup not half full but three-quarters full, in fact, saying that it could be worse,
Yeah.
and am I fortunate? I do believe that I've been extremely fortunate in terms of the family I grew up in, the family, my husband, we've known each other since we were 8 years old, nine
Oh
years old,
man.
right? Yes, yes. In fact, there's a picture of Sid and me, where we met about 15 years later, and there was a fancy dress parade, right? When we were dressed up as a Konkani bride and groom. My husband's father was a Konkani, and I come from, both my parents are Konkani. So we were dressed up as husband and wife in Konkani attire. I meet the man 15 years later, and literally on our first date, talk about courage, right? I find this picture and I show it to him and I say, if you marry anyone else, I'll sue you for bigamy. Right?
Seriously,
Yeah.
who said that?
So, and the poor guy, now talk about courage. He has, he was barely 23 at the time, and he had moved up to my class because he had got double promotion, etc. So talk about courage. He's a good one to talk about, having courage to get married as young into someone as feisty as I am. But yeah, so.
I'm going to call him on my podcast and ask him about.
Yes, for sure, for sure. He'll have some interesting stories to tell. Yeah, so that was to talk about courage. Knowing at that time, and people ask me like, seriously, you decided then on your first date that you want to get married to him. I said yes. I knew I had no doubts, and this is the man I'm going to marry, and was very clear about it.
Wow. That's quite a journey, and I know that you just mentioned about things that you're looking forward to as well. So while you jokingly said that you're unemployed, I'm sure that you got a lot on your roster already. Any parting messages, anything that you want to leave for the audience, anything you want, the stage is all yours.
I think most importantly, I think all of us go through challenges. I think what's most important is to make sure that you have a strong tribe around you who are there to support you and help you. That could be family, friends, peers, etc. And everything passes, right? Everything passes. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. And I've had very, very dark moments, challenging moments in my life, but I can tell you that I know. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that there is somebody out there who can help you. And if you don't have anybody, please reach out to me. I've been getting a lot of pings over many years in terms of for help. I have always tried to help anybody who's in need of help and has reached out to me. So I think it's important to understand you're not alone. We all go through the challenges. Enjoy the moment. Enjoy life. Right? Don't get too stressed out about it. Things happen, and there is going to be a time where things are going to be really, really fine.
Very interesting. The last question. What's the question that you have for me?
The question I have for you is that how do you pick your podcast speakers?
Very good question. So, just to take you back, my first season was purely random. I just picked up anyone I knew worth talking to. So I had Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Manoj Kohli, Ankur Warikoo, and I kind of exhausted that season with 6 episodes. And then I was like, what next? Then I, of course, started looking at myself and my running background. I'm a 25 marathon plus and done an Ironman. So I found a lot of people, and I knew that athletes and endurance athletes would have a lot of interesting stories of courage to talk. So I had one season around that. The other season, which actually was the second season, was a very special one because in the last 8-9 years, I would have had multiple people calling me for their podcast. They would call me as a guest, and I said, I've always believed in kindness and giving back, and I said this is my chance to give them back. And regardless of what their background was, the instance of courage they may or may not have had, I said you get a chance to be on my podcast, and you get to be talking about yourself now. And then it's just been going on. I've got corporate veterans, I've got people from diverse industries, and I constantly believe that I want to go as diverse as possible. I've actually got a couple of people from the media coming up as well. I've gone global. I've now started saying, hey, I want to get not restrict myself to India, and I want to like bring in the most unlikeliest of people because that's where the true essence of the podcast lies. Is you don't have to be a celebrity to be on my podcast, but you need to be able to articulate your thoughts and your ideas and your experiences and your history and build up into a story, right? The whole idea of a podcast or a medium like this is to be able to narrate an incident in such a way that the other person will hold on to that story, even if it's not relevant for him or her right now. But if they face a situation later in the future, they'll be like, yeah, Latika handled it this way, so I can do it. Right? And that's the central message. It's purely for love of meeting and interacting with people that I do this. There is no financial overtures in this of any sort, but always a great experience meeting people whom I would not have met otherwise, just like you. And I hope I'll get a chance to catch up for a warm cup of coffee when I meet you in Bangalore next.
Absolutely, always welcome. You're welcome to come and speak to our SonderConnect fellows. We have some phenomenal, phenomenal founders who have done, Alina from Mitti Cafe, right, from 5 to 60, 70 cafes with disabled people. So happy to, there are a lot of them who've shown courage and are doing, wonderful things.
Yeah. No, entrepreneurship has a special bent. That's my PhD topic. So, right, I never miss out on a chance to meet entrepreneurs and hear their background story to substantiate my research further upon.
Great. Talking about PhD, we just got a PhD in the family. My husband got his last night.
Wow. Awesome.
From
Congratulations to him.
thank you from Purdue.
Wow.
It's he's the smart
What's the
one in the
subject?
family. It was DTech in the IT industry. So right now is the thesis is still under embargo because it was just last night. There's some changes that need to be
Got
made
it. Got it.
before he publishes.
I
But
know all
yeah,
about the back and forth which happens going to happen with
yes,
very soon.
exactly. So he just got it last night. So that was a big moment. I have no idea, how he's done it straight 4-0, but great. So someone has to study and be the smart one.
Someone has to let someone be the smart one and study as well, right?
Yeah. I'm very happy to let him be the one, and
The
and be
co-passenger holding the GPS has
yeah.
equally an important role to play, right?
Absolutely. And then, I'm the cool one, chasing music everywhere, chasing musicians, entrepreneurs. So that's how it works.
Great. Thanks a lot, Latika. It's been wonderful
Thanks,
talking to you.
Ekta.
And just
Thank
for the
you. Same
records,
here.
it's the longest ever podcast. So thank
Oh,
you.
wow. Sorry I don't know if it's a good or bad thing.
No, no, that's definitely good. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.